Hello, everybody, and welcome to Practical Inclusion. We're on a Wednesday today rather than a Tuesday, so thank you for tuning in, or if you're watching the replay, we welcome you too, and thank you for watching these, and for those who are watching them on a weekly basis and engaging with it. It's really fantastic. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're broadcasting from today. For me, it's the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and future, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who will be watching us today. Gemma, whose country are you broadcasting?
I'm on Wadawurrung land as well. So I'm just between Geelong and Melbourne. So I am sharing the land that you are on, and I acknowledge our First Nations people, past, present and emerging, and pay my respect. So thank you.
Thank you. And Tanya?
I am here in Sunny Moreton Bay in Queensland, and I'm on the unceded land of the Jinnaburra, Kabi Kabi and Yugara people.
Fantastic. And Lillian?
Yeah, I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people, which was never ceded, and I would like to pay my respect to the Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders that might be on this call today. It's an absolute pleasure to be on this land and to learn from one of the oldest cultures on the planet.
Fantastic. Now, we've got quite a treat today because I haven't got one guest, I've got three. When these incredible professionals agreed to come on this, I got really excited, as I'm sure you're going to be as you hear from them. And the wealth of knowledge in this screen is really quite extraordinary. So it should be a really great session. I want to start by giving you, usually I get the guests to tell their personal story. I want to start today by asking all of you to tell me a bit about the purpose of your business and the work that you're doing, and also maybe share with us a moment or an action or an initiative that you've been a part of that you're particularly proud of in the diversity and inclusion space. So maybe if we start with you, Lillian.
So my business is set out to help individuals and organizations harness the gifts of diversity and inclusion. I call myself a diversity and inclusion evangelist. It sounds very religious based, but it's really about mobilizing people to drive something that is shared. It's a shared human experience, and which I believe diversity and inclusion is all about. And I do this through delivering African-inspired keynote presentations and workshops. I also offer consulting and coaching services, and I've had the pleasure of working with clients like Medibank Private, Open Universities, and Parkville Juvenile Correction Centre. I have had so many opportunities to work on inclusion initiatives that I'm proud of. The very latest one is what I'm working with Gemma. So Gemma and my other colleague Chantel Thompson, we have created a bespoke program. And this is about a program that approaches race, equity, and inclusion in a very unique way. And we're very excited to work with national and international organizations to really drive change in this area. So that's one of the latest initiatives that I'm proud of.
Fantastic. And I'm so excited by that. When I saw you mentioned, you talk about that on LinkedIn, it just gave me a smile instantly, because I just think what power to connect like that and to do the work that the three of you are doing. Gemma, did you want to piggyback off that and give us your spiel?
Well, that's definitely my favourite project or achievement in progress so far that Lillian has mentioned. I think, three women who have differences and similarities and shared experiences coming together to create a conversation around how do we become better humans to other humans, that taps into the moments where we need to be stronger allies to one another. I think is really an important conversation, because so many people are shying away from these vital conversations because they're scared of getting it wrong, which is why I guess your practical inclusion session works so well on that topic. So my business, just to touch on that, is I run a consultancy called Workplace Edit, and really my mission is to make workplaces truly work for more people and more organizations. And I do that mainly through experience design. So rather than, focusing on fixing the people within organizations, I really help organizations tap into how they can create experiences that are more equitable and more accessible for more people, especially parents and carers, and flexible workplaces, so that we can all have lives and we can all thrive inside and outside of work. So really, I work at the intersection of diversity, equity and inclusion and employee experience.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gemma. And Tanya, your turn.
Yeah, so I've been in corporate, mostly in HR roles for about 15 years now. And basically, I just got really sick of working in workplaces that expected the absolute best from me 100% of the time, but offered a really crappy work experience in return. I feel like that's a very fair trade. So I'm on a mission with my business to turn average workplaces into awesome ones, really through deliberate culture creation. I think a lot of the times workplace culture is left as this like accidental thing that just kind of evolves. So I really support businesses to create cultural strategy. A little bit like Gemma was talking about, actually really putting it front and center of why businesses do what they do. And in terms of the thing I'm most proud of, I guess one of the things I still get a little bit of a frisson of joy from is I used a lot of workplace data and particularly gender data to prove to one of my previous employees that they weren't quite as woke as they thought they were when it came to diversity and inclusion, and really set the scene to be able to drive a diversity and inclusion program in that business. And I was then invited to join part of the executive committee, steering committee, that then implemented their grassroots diversity and inclusion program that really did lead to some positive change. So always like proving people wrong and for positive reasons.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure all of us can relate to that so much, that moment when you realize you've got someone and you've really helped them see through their previous ideas and thoughts around inclusion and diversity, and how you turn them into that champion going forward. So I love that story, Tanya. For today's session, and thank you all for giving us that introduction. For today's session, we're doing a Q&A, so I would love you to type in, if you're watching on Facebook or LinkedIn, or even if you're watching on the replay, feel free to type in questions there and we'll get back to you, we'll address them. So if you've got questions for this incredible panel, type them out and we'll endeavour to get to them. Now, we had some questions that came through prior, which is fantastic, and they're nice meaty ones too, which we haven't really addressed on this practical inclusion before either. So I think it's fantastic. The first question that I'm going to launch into was something that I have heard quite commonly, and it's rather than what do you look for to see that an organisation is inclusive, it's what do you look for to see that an organisation perhaps isn't? You know, if you are somebody who's on the talent market and you're looking for a job, how do you know that an organisation is going to be inclusive for you? Or alternatively, if you're a consumer, you're wanting to access a particular service, how can you tell whether that organisation is going to provide you an inclusive experience? So there's the question. Who would like to jump into that one first?
I'm happy to start to wade in. I think there's definitely, being on the outside, it is a little bit difficult. I think inclusion is very much more about the feel than perhaps the visible representation. I know a lot of people talk about, having websites that have great representation, but then when you actually get into the business, it is not an inclusive environment. Those benefits of all of that lived experience is not welcomed or valued by that organisation. So I think it is really tricky as a consumer and as a job seeker, or even as an employee, a new employee in a business, to really get the idea of how inclusive an organisation is. I think you can look at some of the observable stuff. So really basically, is there visible diversity and representation on their website, particularly if they've got their board or their executive groups on there? Is there actually something that you can see that suggests that they are diverse and inclusive? But again, that's not a perfect science. I think I saw recently that Glassdoor has now put a diversity and inclusion metric in their review system. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out and how that becomes more sophisticated over time. Because I think the best insight that any of us can really get is from the lived experience of employees within that business, and particularly with those people who have lived diversity experience in that business, sharing their views of, I am LGBTIQ and I did not find this an inclusive workplace for these reasons, or, I am English as a second language and this is what I found challenging. So I feel like that's going to be really interesting. I think using your networks and looking at things like LinkedIn and finding people who work within that organization and asking them about what they've experienced, what they've seen. Do they have non-gendered bathrooms? Do they have breastfeeding facilities? Do they live the values of flexible work? Asking some of those poignant questions, particularly as it relates to your diversity and what your needs are, I think is possibly the best way to kind of get that intel.
Yeah, that's some good tips.
Yeah,
Gemma,
I might just jump in on that, because I think that the points you were making there, I was just reflecting on things like the Glassdoor and things like Great Place to Work and all of those. I think my caveat and my what I would invite people to do is, when they're looking at that information, is this an inclusive place or great place to work for who? Right? Because I think that's sort of an important overlay. And it's really tricky. Like, let's be honest, you look at Glassdoor and I think other sites like that, and you can get a feel for the lived experience of people, and you can make a generous assumption that the people commenting on there are diverse. But what you don't know is, if you're looking at 100 Glassdoor reviews, if they're all from really similar people saying that they all feel included, but it's a homogenous group, then you don't necessarily know if it's going to be an inclusive environment for you, for a place where you feel like you belong. So I think, to add on to Tanya's amazing advice, is to invite the experiences and try and fact find from different people, different levels in the organization, and the different ways people have experienced the organization as a consumer and a customer as well. And the third one is as a supplier. So I think, there are often there's often great experiences that come from how suppliers experience an organization. So I think, if someone's been the catering supplier to an organization and they're your friend and they're at a barbecue, ask them how it is to deal with them. Do they feel like they're treated with respect? Do they feel like the organization works with them on an even playing field, or do they feel like they make it difficult for them? So I think there are some ways that you can look at it, but my lens and my invitation would be an inclusive place for who, because there are organizations who win Great Place to Work awards because of their beer kegs and their kombucha taps, but they have no breastfeeding rooms for parents who have returned to work. So I think, a Great Place for Who and inclusive for who is just a sort of an important overlay, and it's really tricky to find. So ask different people.
And just to add on to that, the measurement component is a really big thing. Tanya, you talked about the importance of data. Leading organizations measure for inclusion. They understand what inclusion means, so they're very clear about how it's defined within the organization, and they do have questions within the employee survey where they actually ask specific questions around inclusion. So when you ask those questions and then get the feedback, then the next thing is, what do you do with that information? How do you build capability? And what I've heard from national, global organizations that are doing really well in this area is that they take the findings and they use a competency-based framework to build capability and to really support leaders, to support individuals, to really drive inclusion. So that whole experience can change the inclusion game, can change the landscape, and also can change the experience for the consumer, for the supplier, for the employee, for the community. So I think measuring inclusion is a really big part of it.
Yeah, I love that. And as you were talking, Lillian, I'll just add one more point to that because I know we're short of time, Bree. But one example that sticks out to me is Culture Amp recently released their plan to address racial inequality. And one of the measures in there is that they're actually going to look at the experience specifically of their Black campers. So I think that goes into, we can look at the inclusion data, but as Lillian said, we have to slice and dice it, and we have to look at, who is experiencing the workplace, because it's all well and good me saying, oh, we've got a really diverse and inclusive workplace, if Tanya and Lillian and Bree think very differently. So slicing and dicing the information and using it in a targeted way to build capability and interventions, I think is and that was just one example that is available on their website that you can explore. So
I love that. We've covered off on certainly some wonderful points for people to watch out for. And I do like that, coming back to that measuring of inclusion, because certainly what we hear a lot from people is too often, I think, that kind of measuring and that data is seen as tick box. So it's like, as soon as you're collecting data, you're doing a tick box exercise, it's not meaningful. Well, no, actually collecting the data and acting on it in a meaningful way is what you should be doing. But it's very difficult sometimes to make that distinction and understand when you're looking from at an organisation from the outside. They've got these ticks. Have they actually done the work that's required post getting that information and collecting that data? So I like that. But what we've heard very strongly there is really seeking the voice of people who interact and are part of that organisation is really kind of your best go-to almost. If you can find, as you say, Gemma, the people who are similar to you and who may have a similar lived experience to you. So let's move on to the next question. Thank you all for your fantastic comments and keep them rolling through. The next question that came through is really fun actually to explore, I think. And this is around employee resource groups. And so often organisations will start on diversity and inclusion work, and the first thing is we've got to set up our employee resource groups. Or you ask them what they're doing for diversity and inclusion, and their answer is, we have employee resource groups. And that's seen as a gold star and kind of the start and end point perhaps. So the question is, do these employee resource groups or advisory groups, each organisation does it differently, do they serve a purpose? And if they do, how have you seen them serve a meaningful purpose, and how do you see them acting in a way that really does help drive inclusion and change?
I think employee resource groups are fantastic. They're powerful. They can drive change. I have had the pleasure of serving in an employee resource group at Medibank Private, so their gender equality group. And it was executive sponsored, and what the design of that whole strategy was, that particular resource group was used to drive gender equality and was ensure that gender equality remained a high priority for that organization. And being part of that was really powerful, because you get to represent the voices of other employees and advocate for that in the resource groups. And that was great. And that was one of the many contributors for Medibank being awarded Employer of Choice for gender equality. But the other side of just having an employee resource group for the sake of having one, and that can really backfire me, is if that is the only strategy. And the problem with a lot of organizations is that they assign complete responsibility to their ERGs, or the employee resource groups, and other people wash their hands, and they say it's their responsibility to drive change when it's everyone's responsibility. So I think there needs to be a strategy that overlays the employee resource groups. That's one avenue, but each person needs to step up and be an active player to drive change, because it cannot be completely assigned to the ERG. That's a big weight to carry for a whole organization. So that's the only time I can see the ERG being ineffective. Otherwise, it's really
I love that point.
Oh, Gemma?
No, go Tanya.
Oh, No, I think that in complete agreement. I think the resource groups are so critical, and certainly in the role that I played in creating a diversity and inclusion program from scratch, what did exist was exactly that, employee resource groups, but they were very disjointed. And a lot of the reason that came to me is they weren't trying to do the exact same thing. So they all wanted to do bias training. So they were all going out individually and getting quotes from different providers. And it just was inefficient. Like they were trying to create change, but pulling in slightly different directions and competing, and there was no consistency. So I think Lillian's point of having that clear strategy and that executive sponsorship is so important. The other thing when I took over with the diversity and inclusion program is I made sure that each of those employee resource groups had a principal level sponsor within the business, so an executive level sponsor. There were some that did, so they got better resourcing, they got more airtime, they got more traction. There were smaller employee resource groups, or for example, there was no disability resource group. They were getting no airtime at all. So it was a very deliberate strategy then of coming in and looking at that, I guess, from that helicopter view and going, well, there's a bit missing there and a bit missing there, and they don't have adequate senior representation. So let's create that for them. And then what we were able to do is pull out all of the things that they were wanting to do collectively and create that as an organizational program of work that was then taken out of that employee resource group and delivered separately. The other thing I noted is, I think, again, having that executive sponsorship is important. What I think the burden then of education and effort all falls to the people within the employee resource group, who are already the people that are marginalized and finding work life difficult for some reason. So I think adding the burden of like, please train everyone why your diversity group is important and how do we fix all this stuff is a big ask. So the other thing I've seen work really effectively is people seeing employee resource groups and the programs that they deliver as actual work, not an add-on to people's job, but let's take you offline so you can work on this really essential program that will help our organization become more inclusive. We'll pay someone to come in and do your job while you go offline and do that part. And I think that's really critical, where people are able to, if they feel passionately about that, obviously they do if they're part of an employee resource group, they can focus on that without having to think, oh, I need to do a full-time job, look after my kids, care for my aging parent, and do all of this emotional work on top through this employee resource group. So I think acknowledging that the efforts that people put in are legitimate additions to the business and valuing that is a really critical step as well.
Yeah. I love what Lillian was saying before around the employee resource groups and networks can be amazing, but if they are your only strategy, they will really have a very limited impact. So I would say I'm a bit biased on this one because I've developed a program for employee resource groups. So obviously that tells you that I think that they are great. And here's my caveat, and this might be a bit of a negative framing, but I think it will help the people listening. So I think if employee resource groups are your only strategy, it will fail. So please make sure it is an integrated part of your overall DEI and engagement strategy in your workforce. The groups can often also fail if they lack a clear purpose, why they exist, and what is their unique contribution. You mentioned up front, Bree, these groups can play different roles in different organizations. In one organization, they might be a advocacy group. In another organization, they might be a reference group for business decisions. Like, this is a group I go to before we launch our marketing campaign as a checkpoint to say, how does this make you think, feel, what have we not noticed? But getting really clear on what the purpose of the group is and what their unique contribution is within the structure, the wider structures of the organization is really important, because otherwise what happens is the ERG will start doing some work and the learning team will say, we've already got that on our slate. We're already going to do some training around that. You start to get these sort of treading on each other's toes. So purpose then leads to clarity. Clarity can lead to some clear goals. And, you know, it's really important when you are quite often volunteering in these groups, which I think is an issue in itself, but volunteering in these groups, you want to know that you're having an impact. So having clarity around the goals of the ERGs is really important. Setting the groups up for success with clear executive support and sponsorship. One of the reasons these groups sometimes fail is because of the lack of support. They're under-resourced and under-supported. They're not given clear funding for their work. So again, looking at what is it that we're trying to achieve and what budget might we need for that as a group, and how do we get that through the executive sponsors. I think having clear purpose, clear goals, and rewarding and recognizing the efforts of people in employee resource groups. These groups can fundamentally shift the way that your culture feels, and they can fundamentally shift the way customers experience your organization. They can audit your, you had a great example a few months ago, Brie, on LinkedIn, where you had a customer experience, right? And there was asking you for a title and some information that wasn't necessary. An employee resource group can audit your customer practices and say, here's where I didn't feel included. Here were the issues for me, and they can remedy that. What that reduces is the legal issues, complaints, ombudsman complaints. So there are some great value that ERGs can offer. If they're set up properly, they're part of an integrated strategy, and they're given the right support to succeed. So that's kind of my summary.
No, that's fantastic. You've done the summary for me. Such rich information there about employee resource groups, and I know that there'll be listeners madly jotting all that down. You will be able to watch the replay if you're watching this live to get that information, because I think that's absolute gold there. We've been told exactly how you can get the value out of the employee resource groups that you need as an organisation without sacrificing the members of those groups, which I just think is so incredibly important. And I think one of the areas that this happens probably in the worst way is around pride groups. And we see just constantly pride groups being lumped with the full responsibility to create LGBTI inclusion in a workplace, and at the same time organise the float and the Pride March and Wear a Purple Day and all these other events as well. And I don't think that's ever okay unless people, as you say, are allocated time. It's part of their job description to do those particular roles and perform that function. And we certainly need to get that piece right.
And very quickly, one of the considerations on that, I think that Tanya mentioned around the capacity of people, is you have to understand your workforce and how they are scheduled, the scheduling of your workforce, because otherwise what happens is the people who have more autonomy over how and when they work tend to be able to schedule the ERG work into their diaries more easily. And what happens is the people in scheduled environments, such as call centers and warehouses, feel like they cannot contribute effectively to ERGs, and we lose their voices. So looking at workforce planning and scheduling and how you can allocate a couple of hours per month out for those people to contribute is actually kind of, if you've got a scheduled workforce, that's one very practical tip that will help you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's a nice kind of way to start summing this up is that practical tip there from Gemma. As always in these practical inclusions, we like to have practical things you can go away and do. Tanya, did you have a one thing that you'd love to see people go and do this week to create inclusion?
I think there's probably a few diversity groups that get a lot of airtime and some that get a little bit more forgotten. That's certainly my experience working in this space. So one thing I would recommend, if it doesn't exist already, is create a channel in your online communication platform, whether that's Teams or Yammer or whatever you're using, and just start sharing content and building awareness. And I guess we all live in our bubbles, and I think people can kind of rattle off like pride groups, disability as kind of those big diversity groups, but there's things like invisible disability, there's things like neurodiversity. This week is Carers Week, and that is not parents, that is people who care for someone with illness or aged parents or drug dependencies. There's these groups that just kind of, I guess, are smaller and kind of fall off the radar. And I think the more we can understand that there's so many different types of diversity that need support and adjustments to the workplace and what that might look like, and the burden that some of the people sitting next to you are going through that you just don't even know because it's just invisible to you. I think building that empathy and that business case for why business needs to be better, because essentially there isn't just one employee that's this cookie cutter that just fits in and will work in that environment. Like scratch the surface of intersectionality, that tends to blow people's minds. It's not a word that's widely, I don't think, understood outside of these circles. But then when you start talking about, there's this multiplication factor as you tick off more diversity boxes, that needs to be considered. I think building that awareness and education and understanding the complexity of this issue means that hopefully there'll be less of this, let's just start an employee resource group. Or run unconscious bias training, which tends to be the two be all and end all catch-all solutions. So I think if you can do one thing, start some of those complex conversations in your workplace.
Thanks, Tanya. And we are out of time, but Lillian, have you got one quick tip to pass on for people to take on this week?
Yes. So my quick tip is based on my cultural heritage. So coming from Kenya, we have a collectivist mindset. So it's about collaboration. It's about people working together to achieve a common goal. If we approach diversity and inclusion from that mindset, then there'll be a lot more, I think we'll be able to accelerate change. We'll not be having the same discussions over and over and over again, year in, year out. I think we need to start thinking, how can we mobilize people so we can actually see diversity and inclusion as an opportunity, not a problem, an opportunity that we can all contribute towards, and how can each person play their part? So that is something that comes from a cultural heritage. Each person is supposed to be an active player. You step up, you play and contribute what you have. So it's literally about that. If you go to the workplace, identify what opportunities are there for every person to step up and contribute to this opportunity to drive change.
Love it. I like that. Inclusion's an opportunity. Let's definitely end on that. That's fantastic. Thank you, all of you, for coming on today. It's been incredible. I know the comments have been going crazy and people have been really interested in your content. There was a question that we didn't get to, so we'll make sure we answer that in the comments. You can I've tagged each one of these amazing operators in the post so that if you want to get in contact with them, please link up with them on LinkedIn or through Facebook for those of you watching on Facebook. Thanks, everyone. This recording will be up on YouTube by tonight with the captions, so feel free to share it around then. Thank you all, and we'll sign off now.
Thank you.
Thank you.